Half my tomato plants were already dead. By the time I understood what had actually happened, not a pest, not a disease, a letter from the Water Authority, dated 3 days before it arrived, informing me that Maine's access for outdoor use was suspended effective immediately. 40 plants in full fruit, runner. Beans heavy on their poles, a pumpkin patch pulling something close to 20 gallons every single day, out of soil that was already cracking in the July heat. I stood in that garden, holding a hose that had become a prop, a piece of theater, and I counted what I had left. 200 gallons sitting in plastic butts along the back fence. 50 gallons a day minimum to keep anything alive. 4 days. That is not a gardening problem, that is a countdown. And here is what nobody tells you when you start growing food. You can do everything right. You can amend your soil, rotate your crops, start seeds indoors under lights in February, harden off perfectly, transplant on schedule, feed on schedule, prune on schedule. You can follow every rule in every book, and then a single decision, made in an office 40 miles away, by someone who has never grown a tomato in their life, kills half your harvest in a week. The beans went first, then the smaller tomato plants, the ones without deep roots yet, then the pumpkins just stopped, leaves curling inward like fists. I was not a bad gardener that summer. I was a gardener who had built his entire operation on top of someone else's water supply and never questioned it. That is the trap, not incompetence. Infrastructure dependence. Every backyard grower who relies on a mains tap is one policy change, one drought order, one burst main, one price hike away from watching months of work turn to compost. And the standard advice, the single water butt bolted to a downpipe, is barely a gesture. A 50-gallon barrel fills in one moderate rainstorm. 1,000 square foot roof sheds roughly 1,000 gallons in a single inch of rainfall, and that little barrel catches 50 of them. The other 950 pour straight into the storm drain. While you congratulate yourself on being sustainable, it is not a system. It is a participation trophy. I lost the beans entirely that year. I lost income from the tomatoes I had promised to a neighbor who was paying me by the punnet, and I sat with that failure for a long time before I understood that the answer was not a bigger barrel. The answer was a completely different relationship with the water that already falls for free onto my roof every single week of the British year. What I needed was not a container. I needed a sequence, a chain of vessels that could catch everything, hold it without waste, and move it to my plants without me lifting a 20-pound watering can from ground level 6 times a morning until my back gave out, and I quietly stopped irrigating altogether, because that is how most garden watering systems actually die. Not drought, inconvenience, the quiet friction of bending and lifting and carrying. Until one evening, you just do not bother, and then another evening. And then the soil dries and the roots retreat, and the whole season slides away from you in slow motion. The system I eventually built solved every one of those failures for less than $300 and a single weekend of work. 3 tanks connected in sequence, each one doing a specific job that the others cannot do alone, and the first piece of that chain is the largest vessel. In the setup, positioned directly under the downpipe to swallow everything the roof delivers before a single drop hits the ground. The soil in those dead beds looked perfect. That was the part that haunted me. Dark, crumbly, expensive. Had bought 40-pound bags of premium raised bed mix from the garden center at $9 each, 16 bags total, $144 just to fill 24 by 8 frames. I had added granular 10-10-10 fertilizer every 3 weeks, exactly as the label instructed. I had tilled the beds at the start of each season to break up compaction, just like every gardening book told me to do, and my tomatoes still collapse from the roots up, yellowing from the bottom leaves first, then wilting overnight as though someone had pulled the plug on them from below. I blamed myself for 2 years, bad watering schedule, wrong variety, not enough sun. Then I pulled a dead plant out of the ground one afternoon and noticed something I had never paid attention to before. The roots were short, shallow, and completely bare, no white fuzz, no branching filaments reaching out into the surrounding soil, just naked, stunted roots sitting in what amounted to a sterile brown medium that smelled like nothing at all. That absence was the clue. A healthy plant root in functioning soil is wrapped in a web of mycorrhizal fungi, thousands of microscopic threads that extend the root system by a factor of 100, trading phosphorus and micronutrients to the plant in exchange for carbon sugars. That fungal network is the plant's immune system, its pharmacy, its communication line to neighboring plants. And I had been killing it every single season without knowing. The tilling shredded the fungal threads physically. The synthetic fertilizer flooded the root zone with salt-form nitrogen, so the plant had no reason to maintain its fungal partnerships, and the fungi starved. The herbicide I sprayed between beds to keep paths clean leached sideways, and poisoned whatever mycelium survived. Every product I bought was designed to replace a biological function with a chemical input, and every chemical input degraded the biology further, which meant I needed more inputs the following year. 16 bags of soil became 20, one application of fertilizer became 3. The garden center got richer, my soil got deader, and I kept blaming the weather. Here is the part nobody told me, the part that made everything else click into place. I had been feeding my soil for years, compost worm castings, mycorrhizal inoculant, the whole expensive ritual, and the biology kept dying. Not because the amendments were wrong, but because every time I turned on the hose, I was sterilizing the top 3 inches of earth with chlorinated municipal water, treated drinking water, the same stuff that kills bacteria in a pipe, was killing bacteria in my beds. I was inoculating with one hand and disinfecting with the other, and I never once connected those two actions. The soil food web is not a metaphor. It is an actual network, billions of organisms per teaspoon, bacteria clustering around root tips, trading nitrogen for sugar, fungal hyphae, stretching inches, through the substrate, carrying phosphorus from one plant to another, like a courier service running on chemical signals. These organisms are not optional extras, they are the mechanism by which nutrients become available to roots. Without them, your fertilizer just sits there, locked in mineral form, washing deeper with every watering until it hits the water table and becomes someone else's pollution problem. And chlorine, even at the low concentrations in tap water, is specifically engineered to destroy microbial life. That is its entire purpose. We invented it to make water biologically dead, then we pour it onto living systems and wonder why nothing thrives. Rainwater arrives with none of that baggage. It carries dissolved atmospheric nitrogen, a free fertilizer that soil bacteria can immediately process. Its pH sits slightly acidic, exactly where mycorrhizal fungi prefer to operate. It contains no calcium carbonate to calcify soil pores and seal out oxygen. When rain hits healthy ground, it triggers a cascade. Bacteria bloom, fungi extend, root hairs lengthen into freshly opened channels. The entire underground network wakes up and begins transacting. Picture this happening in real time this season. I stopped using the hose. Tomato leaves that had always carried pale calcium deposits came in clean and dark. Growth rates changed within 2 weeks. Sama. Soil, samey seeds, samey sun, different water. The numbers behind this are almost embarrassing. An average roof sheds roughly 28,000 gallons of rainfall per year. A productive kitchen garden needs about 4,000 gallons. Across a full growing season, your roof catches 7 times what your beds require, and nearly all of it currently drains into the sewer, while you pay a utility company to pump biologically dead water back onto your food. That is not a resource gap, that is a design failure, so obvious it looks intentional. The law was always there, written into every raindrop that ever hit bare earth, and triggered a bloom of microbial activity beneath the surface. We just paved over it, piped over it, and replaced it with something convenient and sterile, and the soil responded exactly the way any living system responds when you cut its circulatory supply and replace it with antiseptic. So here is what changed. Everything, and I need you to hear how small it actually was. I stopped watering my garden, not out of neglect, not because I gave up. I stopped because I finally understood that every time I turned on that hose, I was feeding my plants the equivalent of sterilized hospital fluid, chlorinated, pH shifted, stripped of the dissolved organics that rainwater carries naturally, from the atmosphere through leaf canopy into root zone. The moment I removed mains water from the equation, My soil started behaving like soil again. Fungal threads came. Back within weeks, the tomatoes darkened in color and set fruit faster than any season I could remember. Cucumbers thickened, strawberries sweetened. I changed. Nothing else. Samey beds, samey compost, samey varieties. The only variable was where the water came from, and the lever, the actual physical action that made this possible, was so ordinary it felt like cheating. I positioned 3 old tanks next to a shed downpipe. Not a single water butt, which is basically a decorative gesture that fills in one storm and overflows for the rest of the year. 3 tanks, connected so that when one fills, it spills into the next, and the system just accumulates quietly every time it rains. While I sleep, while I work, while I do absolutely nothing. Gravity moves the water. The roof collects it. I did not install a pump for the first 2 tanks. I did not dig trenches. I set them on leveled gravel, ran a pipe downhill from the downpipe with a first flush diverter to keep the initial dirty rinse out. Connected the overflow from tank 1 to tank 2 with a short length of pipe, sloped at a thumb width per meter. That was a Saturday afternoon. By Sunday evening, the system was already catching water from a light drizzle I would have previously ignored. The counterintuitive part is this: I spent less effort maintaining my garden after building this than before. The drip lines running from the lowest tank operate on such low pressure that they deliver water exactly at root depth, slowly enough that nothing evaporates, nothing runs off, nothing compacts the surface. I set a simple timer valve to open at dawn, and close 2 hours later, the system waters itself. The soil stays consistently moist at the level where fungal networks operate, which means decomposition accelerates, which means nutrients cycle faster, which means I fertilize less. One lazy action, letting my roof do what it was already doing. Catching the result unlocked a cascade I could not have engineered with effort alone. The less I intervened after that point, the more the biology took over. Picture the scene clearly because it already happened once, and it will happen again. Supply disruption hits your region. Could be drought, could be infrastructure failure, could be a price spike that turns a head of lettuce into a luxury item. Overnight, your neighbor stands in a checkout line that wraps around the building, cart half empty, face tight with the particular anxiety of someone who just realized they have no backup plan. You walk to your backyard. You open a valve on a tank holding 2,000 gallons of water that fell from the sky for free. You pull tomatoes off a vine that never stopped producing because it never depended on a municipal system that just failed. You carry food into your kitchen that cost you nothing this morning, and nothing last month, and nothing all summer. That is not a gardening hobby. That is a position of power in a world that is quietly removing your options one by one. I want to be honest about what changed in my thinking. For years, I treated my garden as a pleasant addition to grocery shopping, a supplement, a weekend activity. The moment I watched my plants die during a restriction I had no say in, imposed by a company I had no relationship with, something shifted permanently. I was not angry about the dead tomatoes. I was angry about the dependency. I had built an entire food-producing system on top of someone else's permission, and that permission was revoked with a single notice in the mail. The rain still fell. It hit my roof, ran into the gutter, and disappeared into a municipal drain. I was watching my own water leave my own property while my garden starved 10 feet away. The system I built after that failure cost me $287. 3 tanks. A small pump on a timer, gravity doing most of the work. It paid for itself in one summer and has run for free every summer since. But the money is almost irrelevant now. What matters is what it represents. Every liter stored in those tanks is a liter I do not need to ask for. Every row of vegetables fed by that water is a row that exists outside the supply chain entirely. No truck delivered it. No price tag was attached. No corporation decided whether I could have it today. This is the real calculation, and it has nothing to do with savings on a water bill. It is about what happens when the next disruption arrives, and it will arrive. And you are either someone who panics or someone who already handled it 6 months ago by doing nothing more than letting your roof collect what the sky offered. The gap between those two people is not talent. It is not money. It is not acreage.